Сәхибҗамал һәм Кәрим Габдулла. Hi everyone, my name is Violetta and this is the Diversity Podcast, where we explore diversity and identity through stories and experiences of other people coming from various backgrounds. I'm really excited to introduce my today's guest. His name is Namiluko and he was born in Zambia. He's Lozi in Takaleya. At the age of 10, he moved to the UK. I invited him today because, through talking to Luko, I've realized that we all have something to learn from him. Well, at least me. As his relationships with his own identity is quite opposite to mine, and as he said, he had always strongly felt about his own identity, knowing who he is, and the history of his family. I think it's very beautiful, and we're going to try to explore it today. Hi Luko, thanks for joining me today. I'm really happy to see you.
Hi, happy to be here.
Thanks. So to start with, could you please tell us a little bit more about your upbringing in Zambia and about your ethnic background?
So I was born and raised in Zambia for about the first 10 years of my life, and ethnically my background is, largely speaking, the Bantu people, and from those, on my dad's side, I am Lozi, and then on my mom's side, I am Tonga and Tokalea, so it's like a subset in a subset. I was brought up in an area which is also a different ethnicity from those other ones, and that is the Bemba people. So I speak a different ethnic language than either of my parents' original ethnicities themselves.
Oh, okay. So basically where you were born and grown up is a bit different ethnicities live there rather than your mom's and dad's sides, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Was it difficult for you to learn the language of the area?
No.
Because you speak your parents' language, right?
No. So I speak the one language of the area in which I was born and raised in, which is different from my parents' one.
Oh, okay.
But because my parents speak multiple languages from around Zambia, and everybody around me spoke the one language, Bemba, it was easy for me to learn that one because it's just what I grew up with.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So how many languages your parents speak?
Between them, probably 10 to 12. I actually need to double check, but I know they spoke each other's languages and a few more. They spoke the 4 or 5 major languages in Zambia, which would be Lozi, Tonga, Bemba, and Nyanja.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is the Lozi and Bemba languages are different?
Because they're all Bantu, they're quite similar and show linguistic similarities between them, but they're different enough that if you hear one, for example, if I hear Nyanja being a mostly Bemba speaker, I can infer some stuff, but I can't really speak it. It's sort of like hearing someone who speaks a Slavic language would hear something and they might understand a bit of it if they speak Russian, but they might not get something if it's like in Lithuanian.
Oh, okay, yeah, definitely. I understand. Yes, well, 10 languages is a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so since you already started, my question is coming from Zambia as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about Zambia? You already started demographics of it, languages you mentioned, languages spoken, and maybe like a little bit of latest history just for listeners.
Okay. In terms of the ethnic makeup of the country, there's some 70 plus dialects and languages within that country, and that can be determined in different ways in terms of ethnic makeup, but I just know the language and dialects is about 70 plus. And
you said 70.
70, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
that's nice.
It's quite big range of different kind of makeups because, for example, on my mom's side is Tonga, but there's subsets within that. So the specific subset of my mom's side is Tokalea, so they can speak to someone who speaks Tonga and understand each other, but it can be very specific to certain parts and ways and how they do certain things linguistically and culturally as well. So it's like a subset in a subset, and it's also specific to the area that you're born as well, just because that's just how it sort of evolved from that kind of general area.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to comprehend it. 70. I'm just thinking the population. What is the population? Because I know Zambia is not very big country. It's relatively big for Africa, yeah?
Yeah.
But it's not billion people. And I'm thinking 70. I'm just still trying to like absorb.
The last time
few millions or more
was
than
around 20-ish million.
20?
Yeah.
Oh,
but
that's a lot.
It is a lot, but it's because the landmass itself is quite large. It's quite, there's areas which are quite sparse. You can be going through an area and there's like literally nobody who lives there. So it's just like a big wildlife reserve of animals, and maybe there's a few people who live there as sort of isolated villagers. But it's quite, there's a lot of space and a natural area and sort of reserves, which is just full of nature.
Yeah. And I was reading about Namibia, and I know that Namibia and Mongolia are within the countries which are least populated. So I guess Zambia is more populated than Namibia, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think Namibia is a large part of it is desert.
Yeah.
And it gets really hot there. So yeah, that makes absolute sense.
In Zambia, more like safari.
So it's more, what's the word? It's more savanna. So like it's semi-arid. So it can get quite dry. But there's a lot of rainfall as well in certain seasons, in certain areas, especially towards the highlands. So there's places where people congregate, where there's obviously the Zambezi River. It's one of the big rivers in the world, and people congregate along that, and that's where they settle down. Whereas the areas which are very dry and arid have way less people. If you go maybe to the northern province, that has very sparse areas, which is just, again, mostly nature, and there's massive nature reserves of swamp and arid, semi-arid, and savanna mixed together in this massive area of like tons of like square kilometers.
Oh wow, it sounds so beautiful. I'm just picturing it in my head and thinking when I'm gonna buy tickets to Zambia. Do you remember a lot from growing up until age 10?
I remember a lot of parts, for sure.
Okay, then I'm able to ask next question then.
Absolutely.
So I can guess growing up in Zambia is quite different experience from living in the UK. How do you think your early years growing up of your bringing in Africa, in Zambia particularly, and traveling within few countries, because you mentioned that you traveled as a kid, how do you think this influenced you?
I think the biggest influence is the fact that it made me more comfortable and more aware of different cultures and different ways of living. On like a global scale, the areas around Southern Africa, around Zambia, are similar enough that it doesn't feel as like culturally shocking. But obviously when you're young, something that is still quite foreign is quite different to what you known when you were younger, especially different languages as well and different ways of being. One example is, I remember I would visit my mom. We would travel to Namibia, and then there was a tribe of people who speak a language called Dirikwi, and one of their customs is when they enter the house, the elder people would come and kiss you on the mouth, and I found that so weird as a kid, but they did that to me, and at first it was quite uncomfortable, but I just realized this is what they did. In hindsight, it maybe is still quite an odd thing, but it's just everybody did it, so you have this period of people coming through the house, and all of them would basically kiss you on the mouth, and it was quite a jarring thing at first, but this is what they did, and so I kind of had to adapt a little bit.
So it was regardless of whether you're a child or adult, yeah?
Yeah.
It's like a high. Like some people hug or some people kiss on the cheek, something like this?
Basically, yeah.
Because I hug people, for example, but for some people it's not appropriate, I think just the person I am, and then later in life I learned that it's not okay to hug everyone.
Yeah,
things like
people
this,
have certain personal boundaries which can be maladaptive. So how if you meet a French person, they go left to right on the cheeks. That kind of thing. It's like a cultural thing.
Okay. That's actually very beautiful, I think, to have this experience as a child, which makes you more aware. And do you think it also influenced you further in life, or it's just something you remember from your childhood, or you passed it on for your further development? Like when you become more mature adult, do you think this is what you experienced as a child, traveling and seeing different people from different ethnicities and tribes, made you more aware of the diversity of society in general? Or this is something you learned through growing up?
I think part of it is certainly would influence me because I didn't think too much about it as a kid. But obviously when you grow up and you start to reflect back on your time, you realize that you've been through these things which could be quite culturally jarring, give you some kind of form of culture shock, but you realize you've kind of been through this kind of scenarios and ways of being, especially when I like moved from being in Zambia, in a generally pretty homogenous country. You know, it was mostly full of Zambians of the Bantu ethnicity as a larger group, to come into the UK and being for the first time like an actual minority. I still didn't feel that like I guess culturally shocked, because I still had something to root myself in. Mm-hmm. Like I was aware of what I was and where I came from. Mm-hmm. So that was like, I think, a part of my upbringing and part of my identity, being so rooted in my experiences and being around different people. I was still like, I'm still this, I'm still Aussie, I'm still Zambian, but I can also be part of this other culture, you know?
Yeah, you actually almost answered my next question, mm-hmm. Since I was going to ask you whether seeing people from different communities influenced the sense of your identity. Because I remember we talked last time, and we were talking about my identity, just generally my interest in this topic, and your identity. And you said something which really was... I still remember that you said that you always felt strongly about who you are, but wherever you go. And you pretty much answered the question. Yeah. So basically, when you moved here, you didn't feel any sort of, okay, this is totally different life? Did it feel differently for you living here? As you mentioned, you minority, but you still felt very rooted into who you are.
I mean, for sure, you certainly feel different. There was an adjustment period. It would be weird if there wasn't, because before coming here, there's a lot of aspects of what it means to be, I guess, in a country like the sort of the UK, where there's so many more different cultural backgrounds. I mean, in Zambia, for sure, there are ethnicities, but everybody still would see themselves as being largely Zambian, or even though they're not aware of it, largely a Bantu kind of
like majority, yeah.
Precisely. Whereas here, there's so much more of a mixture. And I would say I wasn't fully aware, at least when I was a kid, before coming to the UK, that I was not only just like Lozi or whatever, but I was also specifically like a black person. Whereas in Zambia, I was just like a person, you know, because everyone else around me was just the same, you know. So you become,
of course, you become
much more aware of like not only like your ethnicity, but also like your race. That became a big factor of who you are. So growing up, my parents would have a lot of different ethnic and different cultural people from around Africa. But because they were all black, they tend to congregate together in a lot more different ways. So I grew up around a lot of Ghanaians and Jamaicans. So even though I wasn't from those places, they influenced me a bit just because they had a commonality of being like largely diaspora black people. And that was another aspect of learning to be in like, I guess, a totally foreign country.
Yeah, I understand. This is actually a very interesting thought, because I feel pretty much the same. The way I grew up home in the Republic of Kalmykia, surrounded by Asian people, and then after when I moved back, when I moved to Moscow for uni, I was surrounded not by all Asian people all of a sudden, you know, and I think this is when I probably started questioning. And it's very interesting how you said that you were just a person in Africa, in Zambia, and then you said, suddenly I'm a black person. Did you feel like people refer like this to you, or what?
Oh, no, for sure. Like, you definitely become much more aware of it, especially because the majority of people are distinctly so different looking from you as well, you know? Like, just something as simple as like going to like get my hair cut. That was a new experience for me, because it was just like a barbershop it became like a cultural, like, specific thing. I don't know if you've seen American movies where like the barbershop is like a big deal in black communities.
Yeah, I see. They show like people chill there and spend time. Yeah.
And I got to understand, because in Zambia that's not a thing. It's just a barbershop. But like in the UK, they sort of have this adaptiveness similar to American black culture, where the barbershop is like where a lot of the black community congregates together. So like I would go there, and if it was like a black owned barbershop, it was like this different energy and a different feeling as opposed to going like a predominantly white barber, and they'll be like, oh, I don't know how to cut your hair. And it was like a whole different way of just like something as simple as like an everyday task became like a different experience just because of the culture aspect of me being black and the barber being a different race to me. Like
I've never thought about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be an interesting thing to think about, because until this moment I didn't think about it that much as well. But like I'm realizing now, like certain aspects will influence how you view things which are very mundane, you know, and then become a much more relevant thing, I guess, without having to really think about it too much.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about it, because I've never thought about this in this way. So moving forward, I know that you, from what we didn't talk much, but I know that traveling, as we mentioned, traveling from an early age, but after you finished school and went to uni, traveling has become a really big part of your life, I think. Well, that's an assumption.
Yeah,
not a good thing to make an assumption, but I know that. I know that from both of what we talked about. For me, traveling meant a lot since I was a student. It still means a lot, but I think I'm just trying to understand it better. What value travel has to you? How do you think? Because for me, it has value of being connected to people and like being able to maybe even explore myself through exploring the world, and. But now I'm trying to find other ways to do this, but it's still something very important to me, you know. So what value does it have for you?
I think in a lot of ways I agree with, like it has a good way to connect, because you can reflect on who you are by experiencing and seeing different ways that other people live, and the ways they sort of interpret their own lives as a sort of reflection of your own. But then also, I also just really enjoy having new, novel experiences in different scenarios, because there's, I guess, an opportunity to learn and to grow from there. So even something, again, as mundane as just going to like the shop, depending on the country or the place you're in, could be so different. Like if I went to go to the shop, you know, in like quotation marks in Zambia, it's much more community driven. There's like a market which is like locally owned by people in the neighborhood. You go there every day, you talk to them, you may even owe them money for like, I don't know, a few weeks past. He's like, oh, I'll pay you back some other time. Whereas here, like, I don't think that would ever really happen.
Borrowing money, yeah.
Yeah. Just like, hey, I'm going to pay back at some other time. Maybe if like it's a more locally owned community shop, but everything is becoming much more...
capitalistic.
Precisely, yeah. And I had sort of a similar experience, like if I was, let's say, traveling in like places like Bolivia, it seems much more community driven in how people live and how they sort of participate in their life. So people would be in the street just sitting and talking to each other and just interacting in a much more open and free way, without this sort of like overbearing, maybe... I wouldn't say exactly capitalist way, but like it's less money driven and more community driven. It's much more about taking care of each other. That's sort of like collectivist style of being, you know. Than individualness. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I don't think we gave any context about. I've just jumped to travel topics. So, Namiluko traveled to many places, including South America. He lived in New Zealand for 3 years. I think. You traveled in Southeast Asia, right? For a little while, yeah. And obviously you traveled in Africa. By the way, which countries in Africa you traveled apart from Zambia and Namibia? So mostly Southern Africa. So I've been to Zambia, Namibia, some parts of Botswana, Zimbabwe, I guess technically Angola, but I don't count that one just because I was like over the border, in and out. And I would love to go visit South Africa properly without just being in and out again for like an hour, mostly at the airport. So that's another place I'd like to visit more besides just that little region, because obviously it's a massive continent and very diverse too. Obviously, yeah. Yeah. And it's bigger than it's on the map, right? True, yeah. The map scaling's wild. Yeah, maps are interesting. Maps are drawn by men as well. Actually, I have another question just appeared in my head. Do you feel, since you now, I know you traveled back home a few years ago, right? Or like last year. Yeah. Do you feel different now every time you come back? Do you feel different or you feel the same? Do you feel like, oh, this is
when I was a child, this village, or I don't know, this place looked like, it felt like this, but now I'm looking different. Do you feel like with maturing you changed your perspective on things like home related, like your family or places you've grown up?
Oh yeah, I think part of being, I guess, largely speaking, I use the term like a diaspora kid. Like it makes you, at least for me, appreciate certain aspects of what my life and my community was back there. Like you tend to reflect and say, oh, that actually, this thing that I didn't maybe appreciate as much as a child is much more, I guess, valuable to me now because maybe I don't have it as much or I don't get to experience it as much. Even something as simple as, I guess, we, when I was a kid, used to gather around just like as a family, you know, me, some immediate family, greater, wider family of cousins, aunts, maybe even like a grandparent or two here and there, sit around like a little kind of Bunsen burner style fire and just tell each other stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because
around the fire.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet. Like
in a very old school way, yeah. Because like if I reflect on it back, I think about it, this is something that at least my family and my ancestors would have been doing for like hundreds of years.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and now it's sort of, the more the country develops and gets changed, the more it's going to disappear because, you know, you just, instead of doing that, you sit around the TV, you know?
Yeah.
And that just tends to disappear. And that's a lot of ways you share cultural stories as well. I heard so many stories which would be passed down. It was entirely oral because there's no written language.
Oh, really? Your parents would tell you oral stories?
Yeah. So I remember so many stories about like... Kalulu, which is like the rabbit. It's like a trickster and he plays an important role in a lot of Zambian folklore and it's a very recurring character.
So Kalulu is a character?
Yes, it just means rabbit.
In which language?
I guess Bemba, but the word is, I think, pretty synonymous in other languages too because it's all Bantu, you know? So it's the same character that people have been passing down for hundreds if not thousands of years, you know? And that's like a connecting thread because it's entirely oral. It's not written down at all until maybe now. So like that's something that might be lost if you don't have these kind of things just because technology would make it, there's no need, you know.
To sit around the fire, yeah.
Yeah, because you just sit in a house now and you watch TV.
But would they, do you think people still do it? Like sit
in some areas, for sure, yeah. Not so much.
In more rural areas, you think?
Exactly. Not so much my family because, they have electricity and TVs now.
Are there many, because I'm not really educated on Zambia, are there many areas which where people live more, let's say, semi-nomadic lifestyle? If they do, or it's more like, or it's super modernized? Not super modernized.
It is an aspect. Actually, well, that's a pretty good question because relating back to my heritage, on my dad's side, it's the Lozi people. And the Lozi people have this tradition which is called the Kuomboka ceremony. So every rainy season, that's actually what it's called, it rains a lot. And so what they do is the chief of the tribe, like he's the main leader, you know, it's like a sort of a heritage thing, almost like a king. He would take the tribal people and the entire sort of group as the Rotsi, Lozi people, and would travel from the lowlands, which would be flooded with the rain in the valleys, and go to the highlands. And that's where it would stay until the waters would come down again. And so the land becomes really fertile. So they come down to the valley and plow it and then do that on rotation. So it's like a natural way of just getting the land to be more fertile. And so every April, this thing still takes place to this day. So if you were to go there right now, you could experience the ceremony and see hundreds of thousands of Lozi people from all over the world coming down to take part in this ceremony.
Thousands.
Yeah, because it's a pretty big
thing.
Ethnic and tribal group, yeah, and it spans not only Zambia but parts of Angola, parts of Namibia too, and all these people are still connected to that culture and that heritage. So it's like it's intentionally semi-nomadic. So they'll shift the residence of the king from like the lowlands to the highlands, and they go back and forth every single year. So in some aspect, it's still quite semi-nomadic.
That's really amazing and beautiful. Mm-hmm. So not just one tribe, like many different tribes would do that, yeah?
Yeah, but like, because obviously it was a kingdom, so everybody's sort of like beholden to the one. So it's like and semi-tribal aspects and like subsets of this tribe would come together to do this to, I guess, honor the ceremony itself and like the one king.
Are children involved as well?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Do you remember doing it?
Actually, I've never done it.
Oh
yeah.
wow.
Yeah, it's kind of
maybe you were too little, no?
Yeah, but also partly because I didn't live in the area.
Oh,
yeah, because
okay.
I lived in a different area.
Oh, it's attached to the area.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, because that
area.
area is part of the Zambezi River, and that floodplain gets flooded up. But yeah, I do actually want to go do that at some point because I feel like it's a good cultural experience for me.
Yeah. Well, if they still do it, that's amazing. But obviously, yeah, I can't imagine it. You're talking about these beautiful things, and I'm just sitting here and visualizing everything, and I'm like listening my own story in my head with different colors. That's amazing. So since we mentioned traveling a little bit, I would really want to talk about your experience living in New Zealand, because this is something like very new to me, and I don't know any people from New Zealand. I only have tattoo of Maori culture. Never been there, but I would really, really love to go there and to just experience life and meet people. But I know you lived there, I think, for 3 years.
Yeah.
Partly
roughly.
because of COVID, right?
Yeah, I almost missed because of COVID. I guess I just decided to stay there because I figured, it
Why
probably
not?
was it's a good option instead of coming back to the UK.
So how was what was unique about your New Zealand experience? I know that there was something about people and connecting to people. So would you tell us a little bit more about that?
I found, for starters, New Zealand is in a lot of ways very similar to the UK. It's like an Anglo nation. Almost everybody there speaks English. A lot of them are descendants of British colonies. A lot of people who are there still identify in some aspect to their sort of their heritage and ancestors there. I know one woman I lived with, she knew her clan from Scotland. She still had the coat of arms. She would come back every now and then to visit her people, the clan. But then also, a lot of them are integrated in how the Maori people there are sort of very prominent and very evident because they are like the original settlers of that place. So I got to meet and experience some of their culture, and it is like truly beautiful. I loved learning about their history and how they've sort of themselves, I think more than most other colonized places, sort of made their own identity more prominent in the country.
Maintain the identity.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, like a lot of signs, a lot of places are still called some of the original, I guess, Maori names. But of course, Maori itself is like a sort of general term, because I think originally Maori is just one specific group, whereas they're also themselves as rather separate before they got sort of colonized by the British. So a lot of them especially would still strive for autonomy. There's certain areas in which only Maori would like reside in and no outsiders whatsoever, because it's still their land according to a lot of treaties and according to their sort of heritage and their past as well. But a lot of them who I met were very friendly, very welcoming, and they were always happy to share their culture as well, which is, I think, quite beautiful and quite inspiring as well. It's like really nice to see that,
It's amazing. What is the percentage of a population that Maori?
Ooh,
is it predominantly?
Good question. I wouldn't say it's
because it's very mixed as well, yeah?
Yeah, it is very mixed. So you find a lot of New Zealanders who are partly like either French or like some kind of English or Scottish, with also a lot of Maori as well. So you could find, I guess, in a very general term, different races in the same family who will still identify as Maori, because it's a much more cultural experience there. So you have like super pale people and super dark people who are all still Maori, just because they identify so strongly with their culture. And I think it's very good that they do that, though. It's for a lot of them like a really big way of life, and there's still like these sort of almost like time capsule things where you can go to a certain area and the people there try to live in as traditional as way as possible as their ancestors from like hundreds of years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No electricity. A little electricity.
Maybe. It depends on how deeply they want to go into that. Yeah. But yeah, there's some really beautiful places like that. I didn't get the chance to do that too often. I'd maybe pass through area and see, oh, this is like really cool, but they're always really welcoming either way, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If you just want to learn about it and you're respectful, they're always happy to like help and teach you.
Yeah. I was actually going to ask whether they still live the way of life their ancestors used to live.
Some of them still do, for sure.
Some of them, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that can be a conflict between their perceived rights and what the government and the local authorities might say they can and can't do. I think there's, if I remember correctly, there is a certain amount of Maori representation that there has to be in their parliament. Some people have a contention with that, but I still think it's probably needed just because they need to have a voice constantly speaking for their interests as well. But that itself can be a quite contentious thing, just because some people think it should be entirely, you know, democratic, as in you're elected, you do this, and you represent everybody, not just one special interest group. And so you have this constant conflicts of like people saying, this is this treaty and this is this land, you should honor this. But then people saying, this is everybody's country, we're all here now, we might as well make it the best. And so it's a very interesting way in how their way of being conflicts in a lot of ways with what a lot of the general country as a population and people might want to seek and do for the future.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think they were able to maintain their identity so maybe stronger than some other countries? You know, there are many countries which have history of colonization and oppression. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on that? I think they're just a very strong and resilient people. I mean, a lot of them who I met were very strong-willed. I know it's very anecdotal, but I just felt like they have a very amazing spirit. They have this concept of like mana. It's sort of like a life force and an energy, and it also ties into honor, a lot of other aspects of what it means to be part of not only the community, but also like the land itself. It's so interconnected. And so part of the land. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, go on.
Yeah. But they really love, at least in traditional sense, love to honor everything about where they are. And I think that might be part of why they're so resilient and why they've been so successful maybe in integrating a lot more than maybe places like Canada would, like with their First Nations people over there, you know. It's very similar history, I think, but just a lot more willing maybe to contend with a lot of the aspects that might be unfavorable to them in terms of like the treaties and the colonization efforts. But it's also, I think, it's just a very open culture too. I think it's a lot more inviting and a lot more welcoming to outsiders. I felt, at least especially me, very welcomed by a lot of the Maori people who I met there. A lot of them are still amazing people, and I really do respect and appreciate everything that I learned and experienced with them. Okay.
I love this concept, the mana. Is there any other concepts you could share? Just a few minutes of their culture, or like traditions or something like that. I don't think I'm ever gonna meet Maori person here, will I? I might do.
There might be a few in Manchester. I wouldn't be surprised actually. But
Google.
Yeah, one thing I met this guy just on a boat traveling on the ferry. We got to talking, and then he taught me about, I don't want to butcher the word, but I think he said like a hangi. Mm-hmm. So what you do is when you first meet, at least traditionally in a lot of like sort of Maori culture, you would press your forehead and your nose to each other as a way to connect.
Oh, I love that.
And to show like trust and respect.
Forehead and nose.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was Maori as well.
Yes, yeah. But interesting, he was not only Maori, he was a descendant of one of the captains of a colony ship So like he was both, you know, like, and that's quite prominent and quite often in New Zealand. You find people who are in a lot of ways Polynesian and indigenous Maori from that area, but then also they have like a European side. So you have people who are like very traditional in the sense that they appreciate and respect their culture and where they come from like a sort of indigenous side, but then also they have a last name like McPherson. Like it sounds so Irish, but then you meet them and they still feel like in some ways indigenous and or like very traditional in some aspects. So it's like it's quite a mixed culture and identity, but I think they do a decent job of balancing it out in them. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds really amazing, because when I was reading, I've never met Maori people, but when I was reading, I was 18 when I did my tattoo, you know, and very young girl. But when I was reading, I was just choosing the pattern, and then I saw the tattoo, because the tattoo is a part of a culture in Maori people.
Yeah, it's a very thing.
When I started reading about the culture and then this tattoo thing, that there are some milestones in life and they would make a tattoo on the face or whatever. I don't want to misrepresent because I don't know exactly, but I know that at some age they would do a tattoo or the ceremony and things like that. And generally when I was reading, oh my God, I was reading about that 10 years ago. And I was so impressed, about the culture, but I've never got to meet anyone.
Yeah.
I guess it's pretty far to travel to Europe.
It is a pretty far place to travel to, yeah. But speaking about the tattoo aspect, I think a lot of them are very, not only personal, but very attached to their family as well. So you have I don't want to misrepresent it too much, but I think what I know of it is that it's attached to not only like their family, but also to the place of where it is.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
To the land, yeah.
To the land itself, yeah, because it is an important aspect of the way that they are, not only as a person, but as like a group of people. Because, again, they're very subsets of like different communities who identify strongly with their community, not just as a general Maori people, which is, I think, a more modern concept. Because back in the day, they saw themselves as separate to each other, you know? There was a lot of conflict between the different Maori tribes and groups.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why? Oh, well, everyone had a conflict.
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay, and now it's a more united, you want to say, yeah?
In some ways, but you also have a lot of groups, iwis, who fight maybe for certain areas. In some ways, legally speaking, of course, they're trying to...
Did you say iwis?
Iwi, yeah. I think it's like again, I'm represented, but if I remember correctly, it's like a larger cultural group and community.
Okay.
Sort of like a tribe, in a way. Yeah.
Nice, interesting.
Yeah. And I think in that aspect, I relate to it a lot with how I think of like ethnicities in Zambia itself. Because by and large, before colonization, these different tribal groups were separate to each other. They didn't see each other as the same. Whereas after this, now everybody...
They had to unite, sort of, yeah?
In some ways, yeah. Because not everybody's just Zambian, but if you go back 100, 200 years ago, there was, maybe in my example, there was the Lozi and the Tonga people, which are next to each other, but they're in opposition. But now, because of colonization, my parents could meet, and then, they had me. Whereas in the past, it probably would have been very hard because there were two different rival kingdoms. Yeah, exactly.
They were rivalry? I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean, the whole area was very contentious, like everybody wanted territory and land.
Yeah. Many conflicts in the world.
True.
Yeah, okay. I'm really inspired now by the Maori conception. I think they have, from what you said and from what I read, it feels like the energy of being connected is very like present, and strong there, which I think many cultures maybe... I mean, I just wish it more for myself and like knowing better my own history, I guess. But yeah, it feels amazing. So to maybe finish in a way, I wanted also to mention the diversity of opinions. It's all connected to all our questions, I think. When we last talked, you mentioned diversity of opinions and that you sometimes miss it in your life. And why do you think it's important to have a diversity of opinions, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think by and large, a lot of ways in which we think of a diversity, I think I told you this last time, was we tend to think of it as, people from different ethnicities and different backgrounds together. automatically is going to give you different opinions, but that's not necessarily the case. I just like having a different range of expressions because I think it makes me understand a lot of the way in which I think and how I view the world. And I think it's important because you tend to maybe get locked in your own sort of echo chamber. And I think that's why a lot of traveling is helpful in that regard too, because you have to interact with people who are different to you when you're out in a place which isn't home or which isn't too familiar, because it forces you to sort of relate in different ways to different styles and ways of being. And I think Manchester, being a really multicultural city, is a good thing for the most part. But also, the more you get communities closer together, the more they start to kind of condense and become like an average. And I'd still like there to be a difference just because it makes life really interesting, you know?
Yeah. How do you bring diversity of opinions to your life?
Oh, that is a hard question. For the most part, I like to have different, I guess, people interact with, different friend groups, different scenarios, different hobbies, which are a little bit divorced from each other, just because that's when you get different opinions. Because I think there's nothing worse than feeling like everybody around me is the exact same, because that just means I'm not having any growth in my perceptions of my ideas, and that is why I start to feel stagnant. And maybe that's why I like to travel so much too. When I feel like I'm in a place for a long time and I start to have a sameness, I need to break that pattern and say I want to do something else entirely, and I'm going to go to some other side of the world or something and experience that, because I know it's going to be different.
Yeah, it makes you evolve in a way, right? I think, like, from my experience, some experiences, even if they're challenging, traveling, not traveling, they just push you to, like, come out of that little shell you have, you know? Actually, I want to ask one more last question. As you mentioned Manchester, because I'm sort of new here, do you think there is any sort of community feeling within the UK from your experience living here? Something like in Bolivia. Obviously, it's not Bolivia. But do you think some communities here, because it is super diverse, thanks to history or not thanks to history, it is a super diverse place, the UK. Like, it's not a secret. The different flavors and shades and everything of people. Do you think there are some communities, some groups of people, ethnicities, whatever you want to call it, they still maintain this community feeling from your own experience from living here?
I think for sure there's a lot of insular communities which maintain their own traditions as well. But in terms of like the larger, greater feeling of community in Manchester, I don't know if it's there. I think it exists in certain aspects, maybe in certain activities, certain community groups of like...
But not ethnicity-wise.
Ethnicity-wise, I think insularly, like if you go to a place with a lot of, let's say, Pakistani immigrants, it feels like that's like a very close, tight-knit community. Just like if I'm around a group of Caribbeans, they are very insular in that sense. Like I can go to these people and I can experience an aspect of their culture which I couldn't experience if I wasn't with them. But I don't see a lot of mixing between these different cultures too much. But then maybe it's because I don't see it, doesn't mean it's not there. I just don't experience it too much.
Okay,
myself.
well, I'm asking about your experience, so that what matters.
Yeah, and then my experience is that like a lot of these communities, they exist for sure. And I think if you want to find them, they're out there. And most of them are pretty welcoming. If you go to Chinatown, you can experience a lot of, I guess, Chinese culture.
It makes sense.
In like an aspect of course.
But it's not the way it is like in Bolivia, right? I mean, like my question, maybe I didn't ask precisely. I wanted to ask if you ever experienced this sort of attitude here in the UK.
Of like a community-driven
thing? Yeah, like, you know, like, I'm not saying like, oh, someone come and give you £50 for 3 weeks. I'm saying like...
I mean, yes, please.
Just, I guess it is not very collectivist, society. It's quite individualistic, right?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a good medium point, because I think people should definitely be individuals, but they should still be concerned about how they as an individual can help their greater community. I think that's something that I think almost everybody could do more. And I see aspects of it in Manchester for sure, but I don't know if it's a wide enough thing that it's very common. And also, I think a thing I would say is like my perception of it was that it was a thing in Bolivia, but I didn't live there, so I can't say for sure.
Obviously, it's still an outsider perspective.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. And I think people treat you differently if you're on holiday or on vacation or something. You don't quite get to that aspect. I think the closest I got to that was when I was in New Zealand and I spent a lot of time there. And that's why I feel a lot more comfortable saying that maybe in that aspect, in some ways, that was a lot more community driven in areas I was in.
Yeah, you didn't spend just a week there. Yeah, 3 years is a decent. I can ask you a question.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's wrap up. I think I was very happy. I am very happy to talk to you. I was very glad to have this conversation, and I hope to see you soon and maybe do another one. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Сәхибҗамал тиздән китәр Уфага 6 ел бар әле инкыйлабка Газиз һәм хатыны